Back in here too, live now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. Just about 2:30 on the West Coast as we're following the latest with the protests and demonstrations against ICE, the immigration enforcement operations in Southern California. A live picture right now, as you can see, potentially some protesters dispersing, a line of police on the ground right now. Not exactly sure what's going on, but it looks like potentially Los Angeles police have just showed up, a show of force there. This might be a different vantage point, though, as anti-ICE protesters continue to clash with the National Guard members. They're blocking off this street. This might be a street close to them, but you can see them on the move right now. But plenty of police, plenty of black and white vehicles out now in full force. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but this was the other vantage point we were watching. The California National Guard, some 300 troops deployed to the ground. President Trump there ordering them to take place. So let's just continue on here on Live Now from Fox and bring into the conversation right now former sheriff's detective investigator working on a task force with the FBI, Jamie Copenhaver. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Obviously, what we're watching unfold in real time is taking place there in Southern California. Lots of law enforcement happening. When you see some of these vantage points, what are you looking at in particular?
The first thing I'm going to look for, Andy, and versus yesterday, we certainly see enough law enforcement and National Guard on the street, and they want to kind of cordon off that area so that unruly crowd or protesters, there's some protesters mixed in there, don't get outside of that area so it spreads throughout the city. So they want to kind of keep it contained where they are currently at to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, and of course, we were just kind of watching this, and before you jumped on, it was pretty stagnant shot as they were just at this detention area, different locations now taking place, and we're seeing different law enforcement. How much of a coordination is there between all of these different agencies and entities to make sure they know what's going on, because they don't want to get stranded or out of position? How much coordination is necessary for an event of this magnitude?
You're going to have multiple command posts and command centers. And, despite the political rhetoric that we're seeing playing out between the governor and the president, those cops and men and women on the ground from law enforcement and the National Guard, they're communicating as a one unit, if you will. So, the National Guard is in contact with state and federal, and also the city or county cops that are there to support that effort. So, the rhetoric may be going on behind the scenes, but unfortunately, as we see, the men and women are also, they're trapped here, and they're going to obviously keep the peace the best they can, trying to keep everybody safe, Andy.
And we see some of these buildings potentially right there, and we don't want anything bad to happen. How much are they making sure the peace is kept, but also some of this property, because that damage can add up very quickly depending on the scene. Are they protecting property as well?
Absolutely. And, it's funny because just before we went there, I was Googling and I came up with a number through some research. Just the unrest and civil unrest and riots that we saw out in Minneapolis a few years ago, that was worth about $500 million is what they're estimating to property damage. So, we don't want to see that replay in Los Angeles. Good gosh, they just went through that fire. These people have suffered enough property damage. So, of course, the cops are going to maintain that vigilant, especially around the VA, other federal buildings. And then, the stores and the shops, Andy, that may be in that area, they want to protect that property as well.
Yeah, we're just watching this, and I don't know what happened to lead up to this moment, a demonstrator being potentially detained there by law enforcement. Of course, you can see behind this vehicle, and there's other protesters trying to gather some images of sound and plenty of people. So again, viewer discretion is advised as we're watching this unfold on the streets of Los Angeles, these anti-ICE protests taking place right now, and we do not want it to lead to violence. I don't think really anyone does. We've heard from Governor Gavin Newsom that says don't give President Trump what he wants in terms of this, stay peaceful. protests in a way that is peaceful and non-violent. But unfortunately, some of these happen to take place. I just want to ask you, you're on the ground, there are tense moments between protesters, between law enforcement, between anti-ICE demonstrators and different members. Can I ask just kind of what are the conversations like on the ground about this? Because law enforcement trying to do their job, but they're trying to also potentially move people out of a street, to block a street, cars coming and going. Can you just describe what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, you have a perimeter around the officers that have this person on the ground to effect the arrest and get him secured. As that arrest is happening, you're seeing protesters and people with signs starting to converge on that arrest. So those police officers want to keep those protesters back, so they're not involving themselves in this arrest. So, it's going to help keep them from getting arrested, but more importantly, to keep them safe from whoever they're arresting. I mean, the guy looked like an agitator and a bad actor, and they certainly took care of him, but they want to keep everybody safe as that arrest is happening.
And viewer discretion is advised because this is potentially escalating in a direction we don't want our viewers just to tune in and see something violent like this unfold. And we saw different gas canisters, tear gas, different non-lethal. Can you describe some of the tactical gear, what some of these individuals and law enforcement have at their disposal to disperse some of these crowds in a non-violent way?
Absolutely, but before I get into that, if you take a look at the guy they just arrested, he had a motorcycle helmet on, some type of a helmet apparatus. So he went there for one reason, to get in trouble. But as far as law enforcement, they're going to be equipped with tasers, bean bags, paintball bullets, which really hurt. I mean, those things are hurling down the road when you shoot them out of those paintball guns. They're also going to be equipped with OC spray. And that's an irritant spray. We've seen that from time to time over the last 24 hours of that cloud of smoke, if you will. So you'll hear that popping noise. That is a OC spray going off into the crowd to help disperse the crowd. So, and then the main thing is, we're seeing a lot of these officers carry long guns. You just don't know what's going to happen in a situation like that. So they have the less lethal out using it, but they also have a backup in terms of a real weapon, as we see a lot of these guys carrying around their chest and necks.
And I can't reiterate enough the viewer discretion aspect of this, because you see some of those different bean bags or paintball guns or the tear gas disposal units where they're just tossing them at these. I also want to ask you, because we see different people with cameras, and now in this day and age, everyone has a camera, whether you're on the phone or not, and we have different members of the media on there. How much of a balance is it as law enforcement, because you have to let the journalists do their job as well? What kind of balance do law enforcement have to do about that?
Yeah, I was up in Minneapolis for a short time during that incursion up there. And I'm going to suggest to you that most of the cops that are out that we're seeing on this front line, they're okay with the journalists. They're okay with the cameras. And I'm going to tell you why. We've seen this over the past several years in the climate, defund the police, the brutality, the excessive use of force. So, these journalists, they're literally protecting both protesters and law enforcement to document exactly what's happening in real time. So, I don't think there are any cops or federal agents on the ground that has a problem with that, and it's probably encouraged because, like I said, it's protecting everyone involved. So there are no allegations later.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just wanted to ask that because there's just so many you can see on the right-hand portion of your screen. I believe that is all media. Potentially one of our cameras is down there on the ground as well. I believe you can see there. This is the vantage point that they are gathering as well. Just in terms of strategy or tactical measures by police, are they looking at areas to come together? They're obviously all back to back here trying to close off this street. How much of a game plan do they have, a blueprint of where they want to go or where they don't want protesters to go?
I'm certain that undercover agents may have been or in the crowd, so they're kind of listening to that internal chatter from the protesters to gather intelligence. You're going to have helicopters that are flying orbits to monitor the crowd to see where they're ingressing and digressing. And then here's the caveat of that. You're going to have a lot of National Guard soldiers that are on a standby situation, staging in case that crowd breaks loose from that perimeter so they can quickly respond and cordon it off again. And like I said earlier, they want to contain this to one area so it's not spread amongst the entire city. Then you're going to have really serious chaos.
Yeah, and when we're looking at these images, we're talking about California National Guard members being deployed. Are these California Guard National members? Are these local law enforcement? Can you glean anything from what they're wearing, what they look like? Who are they associated with potentially?
Yeah, if you look at the screen now, what we're watching the live shop, that line of law enforcement folks, those are going to be the emergency response team from the local police and sheriff's office. When you see the guard members, they're going to be dressed in that brown, olive green camouflage that we saw earlier staging by the Veterans Administration building. So, there's a little bit of difference in terms of uniform. So, the police are going to look like SWAT, if you will. But those guardsmen and guards ladies, they're going to look like the Army. They're going to have the olive green camos. You'll be able to tell the difference.
Of course, and it looks like they're kind of blocking off this overpass, and they don't want the highway below it anyone in danger because you can see traffic still moving along at a somewhat slow pace, albeit it is Los Angeles on a Sunday. I want to ask you, because you can see this, the line, it looks very uniform, it looks very strategic. How much training goes into it, and what would training for law enforcement look like to be prepared for a moment like this?
Every agency in the United States has some type of an emergency response team, which is usually separate from the SWAT team. And those ERT members, they train on a quarterly basis, and they train for force multipliers. We keep talking about that, right? You want to show that command presence with a lot of personnel to sort of steer the protesters away from whatever area you don't want them to encroach on. So, in terms of that, they're always in training, Andy. They're always getting the updated equipment they need, such as we see here in paintballs. I've seen a bunch of officers have just regular paintball guns. I will say some of those paintball weapons are shooting OC spray. So, they're training on a quarterly basis. Here's something else is great. These local cops, state and local police officers, which you're seeing on the front line today, they're also training with our Homeland Security agents, HSI. So, when we have a situation like that, it works like clockwork. It's like a machine, and it just starts crunching down, and, everybody's in sync and doing the same thing. And, at the end of the day, we want to keep the people safe. So that's what we're training for.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Of course, training for some of this to make sure the peace is kept, make sure this doesn't get out of hand. I also want to put up just some other shots from the ground right now. We talked about the beanbags, the paintball guns, the tear gas that is dispersed, and it feels like there's a lot of different weaponry and different devices that these tactical gears use. Are they trained in all of them? Are all they similar to use in that regard as well? Because I think we see this potentially a beanbag gun right there pointing at different protesters. Are they all similar to use?
All of those officers are going to be trained with those weapons or that material or tools, however you want to describe it. But here's the deal. Put my description for this, but you're going to have a gas person which is in charge of the gas. That's the officer's sole purpose is if they need to deploy gas, that's your gas guy. And then you're going to have the less lethal guys, such as beanbag and
Can I ask you, was that a rubber bullet? What was that they were zooming in on the ground?
That was a rubber bullet, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
So Andy, I've been struck by those hurt, and it's a huge deterrent, and it's less lethal.
Yeah, that is obviously, I just wanted to ask that because it's so very interesting. If you're never in these protests or haven't seen it or not a member of law enforcement, you might have not seen stuff like this. So you see these different locations right now. I'm not exactly sure what this building is right now, but law enforcement there on the ground. We're also talking about California National Guard. We saw the Los Angeles police, and Pete Hegseth has hinted potentially positioned for Marines to step in. How different would they look? How different would military grade enforcement look on the ground compared to what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think if the secretary actually activated the Marines to show up, you're going to know the Marines are there. The Marines will show up loud and strong. but they're going to be dressed similar. They're going to be dressed ready for a confrontation with these protesters should it turn violent. So they'll be dressed in the same camouflage as you would as a guardsman. So not a lot difference in the uniform. The bigger question is, what are the Marines equipped with in terms of less lethal? Now, we've not seen the Marines activated in the U.S. in a very long time. So I don't know where they're standing in terms of what equipment they have accessible to them. And that's a big question that we don't know.
That is a very good point. We don't know. And of course, to reiterate, they haven't been activated as of yet. I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on this, Jamie Copenhaver. What else are you thinking about right now? Because I also think about the police right now, and they don't want to get stuck. They don't want to get surrounded by protesters. Is that a thought that goes through law enforcement's mind?
Without a question. And that's why the command center is so important in this. So, you know, you have eyes in the skies, you'll see helicopters above, and they're monitoring what the crowd's doing. And that's the cops, or none of these men and women showed up wanting to get trapped behind the enemy lines, if you will. And we've seen the violence yesterday through a little bit last night. And, you know, tempers are high. We've seen some spitting on law enforcement today. So, you know, you don't want to get stuck out of place, if you will. And that's why you see when these law enforcement officials move, they move together in unison, almost in a choreographed way, if you will. So they're all together and they stick together.
That is, yeah, that's just something you can see, one of those cars backing up there to try to get out of this area as you can see the protesters congregating here right now. I want to ask you, because I was also in Minneapolis following the death of George Floyd at some of those protests, and it's always interesting. Day turns the night, and you can sense just a difference in the tension. How much do they want to quell these before it gets night? It's still 2:30 there local time, but how much of the thought is that?
I think it's a huge thought. And, you know, the planners and the leaders and the commanders that are overseeing this operation from law enforcement, they want to stop this before nightfall. And, you know, we saw yesterday as time progressed, it became a little bit more violent. And if I may qualify, you know, people are perhaps working during the daytime. But more importantly, the alcohol could be a huge contributor to this nightfall, if you will, upping the ante and more violent. But, you know, the unfortunate part is, maybe there's some people protesting that believe in what they're doing. And unfortunately, you have those agitators that ruin the entire protest for the legitimate protesters. I just wanted to point that out. It's super sad for the legitimate people to now be infected and incited by these bad actors.
For the legitimate people that are out that are just protesting, just expressing their opinion, whether they disagree with what's going on with these immigration deportations and the enforcement of this, what are their rights? What are they engaged with law enforcement? What can and can they not do? What kind of tips do you have for that?
You know, I think you would be okay anywhere in the United States if you're not out blocking streets. You know, you can go out and wave the flags and hold the banners. You can chant with a bullhorn. But you know, when you start blocking roadways, and as we see in the shot here, I mean, this is a busy intersection that's shut down in the middle of the evening. You just can't obstruct traffic. And you know, here's my viewpoint. If you're going to come up with one of these protests, go seek a permit, do it legally so you'll know what to expect and what you're allowed and not allowed to do. But in this case, you know, a lot of this, I saw a post on social media today wanting people to stage in a certain area to go protest. So, you know, like I said, a lot of this is bad actors and influenced by those bad actors that turn this protest into potential violent behavior.
Yeah, and that's a good point, talking about the impeding the flow of traffic. They're blocking off that street right there. I do want to ask you, because we're just getting into our newsroom, and this is a very fluid situation, day 3 of protests in Los Angeles, but you can see from the LAPD Central Division saying the city of Los Angeles is now on tactical alert. Jamie, what does tactical alert? I know maybe different divisions, different cities have different terms, but in terms of tactical alert, what does that mean? What does that entail?
Yeah, essentially, a tactical alert is going to alert all personnel that have gone through the training for that emergency response unit, if you will. It's almost like an all hands on deck. So, and that's funny that that announcement came out because it's getting closer to dark, right? We just spoke about that. So, they're putting all personnel on alert to respond to whatever need they need to respond to at that location. So, I find that, I mean, it's good planning by the commanders and the leaders, but what these people on the street, they have no clue what a tactical alert is about to happen. And I got to tell you, we've seen these cool down very quickly. Um, but as night comes on, you're going to have other groups in other areas, Andy, is my huge concern, that may start these in different parts of the city. And I think that's what that statement was all about.
In terms of the tactical alert from Los Angeles police, what level does that, is there higher levels? Are there higher levels? Are there a multitude higher that they could reach depending on these protests?
I mean, you have to get the use of force matrix. So, you just can't go out and use force unless you're greeted with that force, right? The same force. But I think what the tactical alert is, I think more than likely the commanders are in fear of nightfall. They're in fear of other pockets of protesters or insiders going to other locations in the city outside of from what we're seeing here and starting something in parts of the city where they're not prepared for. So that alert is going to put those men and women on basically on call as needed to potentially respond to areas of the city where this may flare up later tonight. Would be my guess.
Of course. I also want to put up just a post from the LA Times saying the LAPD is now threatening arrest for disobeying lawful orders there on the ground in the intersection of Alameda and Temple. And that could be this intersection we're looking at right now. It's not super clear what the route of egress is for this. How do law enforcement arrest people? How do them, what level does it need to escalate to that they feel like they need to arrest people?
You have that element of law enforcement out holding that line, if you will. We've seen that all afternoon. And what's going to occur is they're going to have an arrest team or multiple arrest teams come in, and that arrest team is going to be behind the main line, standing guard, if you will. And just as we've seen earlier, that agitator, and we don't know exactly what he did, but you saw a number of, I think it was 5 to 8 police officers go through that line and actually go hands-on with that person. So that was the arrest team. What would cause that? Something like we've seen earlier. If it's an agitator that's, perhaps spitting on one of the cops, throwing something, or just being that loud, obnoxious guy wanting to start trouble, that may be a guy they go in and grab for disorderly conduct charge, just to separating from the protesters to get that agitator away from the crowd.
And again, I'll reiterate, viewer discretion is advised, as some people potentially throwing things at law enforcement right now. They're trying to move through this street, but this street blocking the flow of traffic right now. I want to ask you, because we see different flags and different signs as well, and some of these flags, they are on poles, and that could be a threat to police. How do they view that? How do they view the different sorts of potential threats to law enforcement, different flags and different apparatus that these protesters could have?
I mean, anything that's accessible to these protesters, such as the flagpole, can certainly be used as a weapon, not only against the police, but also other protesters. We've seen over the years where you have these protests, you'll have another faction that's against those protesters, and they start clashing amongst each other. So, those flagpoles, these motorcycle helmets, those helmets are heavy. That is considered a weapon. I mean, if you take that helmet off and punch somebody with it or hit them with it, it's going to be pretty lethal, right? So anything these protesters are carrying could be considered a weapon, Andy, and rightfully so.
Yeah, that is a good point. I think that first person that we saw detained was wearing the motorcycle helmet, and that's a good point in terms of this. I also want to ask you, because we're seeing this in real time, more protesters coming to this point, and those law enforcement officials, those police on the ground, they are unaware. Do we believe there's a police helicopter? There has to be, right?
Absolutely. You're going to have some type of aerial surveillance. And here's the deal. I had mentioned earlier that perhaps some of these guardsmen and some of the ERT people that were put on alert, they're in the staging or a holding area for what we're seeing playing out. You see a ton of people coming towards the main protest. It already looks like the cops are somewhat outnumbered from what I see. So you would want that other element staging to come in to assist the officers that are already on the scene, sort of holding the line, if you will, so they're not overran.
You mentioned them being overwhelmed and outnumbered. Is there a certain ratio that law enforcement prefer when it comes to being around protesters? Is it 2 to 1? Is there a ratio out there?
I mean, I don't think there's actually a scientific ratio, but what you'll see in each one of these pockets, you're going to see law enforcement grouped up in 20 to 50 to 60 officers in a group, depending on where they're at and what they're assigned to. So, as long as that element stays together, it's command presence, right? The protesters look at this big blob of cops, and I respectfully I say that, it's a bad way to explain it, but this group of cops coming to you, it's a deterrent, right? And then when you see the batons come out, that's a deterrent. So, that small element, which we would call small, based on what we're seeing, is pretty effective when they move together. Almost like I said earlier, choreographed, because you want to get that command presence, essentially scaring the protesters back with verbal commands and also stomp and drag. We may see some of that.
Is that white van, could that be potentially one of the arrest vehicles to try to detain people that are agitating, that are making the system worse, or what is that potentially used for?
Yeah, I would say that's some type of booking transport van, if you will. Okay. That came and picked up the guy that we had saw with the motorcycle helmet on. Oddly enough, I think what you'll eventually see as this plays out, if it doesn't if it's not quelled by nighttime, you may see some MRAPs or some Bearcat armored vehicles come in, and those vehicles be utilized not only to deploy police officers, but also to help get the prisoners out should they start making arrests.
All right, I just wanted to clarify. It's so very interesting to see it in real time and hear your perspective on this. I want to ask you, just from your experience, and obviously you may not know any of these officers, but do police officers, potentially people are in the tactical unit, do they have military backgrounds? Is that something that aligns up, that people that maybe have stepped out of the military, that ended their service, jump into law enforcement because of their similarities?
Yeah, I would say since post-Desert Storm, we've seen a lot of agencies go out and actively recruit veterans, former military people. So, I would venture to guess that a lot of these cops that we see on the screen right now, some of them probably have military experience. More importantly, some of these men and women may be National Guard members on duty, kind of pulling both duties, if you will. So, I can assure you there are veterans and probably current Guard members that are involved in this from the law enforcement aspect.
And I want to ask you, because you can see there potentially police in the middle right now. Looks like they did take a step back, the vehicles, to get out of there to make sure that they aren't damaged. You can see, I think that might be different pepper spray or different sorts of things. Anything else on your mind? I know I've been asking you and peppering you with questions. Anything else on your mind when you're watching these images unfold?
Yeah, I mean, to look at this as a normal person sitting at home, it looks chaotic, right?
Yeah.
But as time has progressed over the last 10 to 15 years, our law enforcement community has adapted so very well in terms of addressing these protests properly. You don't see any of the cops out with their batons over their head, getting ready to strike people. What you may see is what we just saw earlier, was a squirt of gas or OC spray. And that's, like I said earlier, it's a deterrent. But law enforcement has adapted so much over the years. I mean, 20 years ago, especially just before Rodney King, you would always see these cops in the riots or the protests with the batons over their head. You don't see that today. And I get that goes to their training. I mean, they're much better trained and equipped to show that use of force.
You led me to my next question, because I did want to ask you about Rodney King, because we saw that unfold back in 1992 in Los Angeles. The National Guard also deployed there for that. If you have any recollections of that, do these look similar? Do these images look different from what we saw back then? Because some $1 billion of damage we have not seen. It pales in comparison in a big way to that. But do these similar? Are they similar at all to you?
In my opinion, it's not at the level that we saw during the Rodney King days. If you recall, there were, as you just mentioned, that there were $1 billion worth of damage, right? We're not seeing the significant damage that we saw during the Rodney King uprising. This sort of kind of resembles Minneapolis. You were on the ground. You have a large contingent of people. We had a car fire last night, but we're not seeing the building or property destruction that we saw in Minneapolis even. So, for the most part, the crowd is pretty calm. But unfortunately, as we see right here, you're always going to have that one agitator wanting to incite the peaceful people. And, of course, the cops have to go hands-on and take care of that and extract that agitator out of the crowd. But I don't think we're at the level of Rodney King yet. But like I said, if we don't quell this, it could happen.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about that. Back in 1992, the LA riots, thousands of people were arrested, dozens of people were tragically killed during that. And you also saw that unfold in real time. The agitator that was pulled back by one of their own demonstrators as well. And you can see different law enforcement piling up, but marching down a certain path as well. When these marchers, when these people move in a direction, because as we watched in Minneapolis as well, they're going in a different direction, they stop traffic. How much are police and law enforcement aware of the traffic patterns, and if they get onto a highway, perhaps, that they can really congest and slow down a city? What are they watching in terms of traffic patterns and highways and blocking different major thoroughfares in Los Angeles?
They have to be cognizant of that. I mean, we saw the line on the bridge just a few minutes ago on the live shot where the police had formed a line on that bridge and wouldn't let those protesters basically get on the bridge and block the traffic. So, especially a bridge situation, if you allow these folks on a bridge and you have passing cars underneath, who's to say that they're going to throw something into a car, especially a moving car? But more importantly, the cops are looking out for the protesters. What if you have some wacko that's driving down the freeway and they see these protesters on the bridge? Who's to say he wouldn't take a shot at one of the protesters? So, as bad as a lot of people are condemning the police for this, but really and truly, the cops are actually trying to contain these folks and allow them to peacefully protest. And that's the sad part about it. It's a lot of people, as we see here. But here's the bridge shot again. So, you see multiple police cars stopping that flow, and they're sort of guiding those people along the expressway rather than allowing them on the bridge.
Yeah, that is exactly right. I believe that's the 10 there moving through downtown Los Angeles,
yes.
A major highway in that region. They don't want, like you mentioned, people to get on the overpass and cause any damage or destruction to cars underneath. We did see images yesterday of people throwing rocks at vehicles. I want to ask you, because we're watching this happen right now, but if a person is arrested, potentially charged with a crime, that might be difficult to look into. How difficult does that make an investigation in terms of a person that is arrested and then charged with a crime, because potentially evidence or video, people asking for that? Is it difficult to go through that process of arresting someone and then subsequently charging them for something?
Yeah. It's like this. You're going to pretty much have some type of pre-printed affidavit. Let's say the bad actor, they got out of the crowd just a minute ago in the motorcycle helmet. Disorderly conduct, unlawful assembly, whatever the charge would be. You're going to take that, arrest him at the scene. You're going to have a transport crew take him to a booking facility, which is the staging area. And then they're going to complete that charging affidavit to introduce that affidavit into the court system. In terms of evidence, this is so well documented. There's so many body cameras by not only the protesters, but the police. They all have body-worn cameras. So, the evidence, I think, is very condemning on that person they arrested earlier. All the attention was on him. Here's what we're not hearing, though. We're not hearing those awful commands from the police: stop, get back, stay back. Giving those awful commands that we've heard over the years in these other uprisings. We're not hearing it here, but I can assure you, someone is down there on a megaphone or a bullhorn, giving commands: stop, get back, and obviously giving those people warning before they make the arrest.
And there's a guy with a top hat there also maybe directing traffic a little bit. It looks like a protester. So you'll never know what you'll see in terms of these protests. You mentioned the body-worn camera, and we know that's so prevalent with law enforcement. Does every single individual here have a body camera on them? Do the California National Guard, do they wear body cameras?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking about that earlier. I was going to actually look it up. My better guess is they are probably not equipped with body-worn cameras. And we're speaking of the California National Guard. But in terms of these police officers that we see, both federal and state and county, most of those people have body-worn cameras. We've seen these play out over the past 2 or 3 weeks with HSI agents going out and effecting arrest. If you take a look at their vest, they had body-worn cameras. So I'm going to say, I don't think the guard probably will have those cameras, but everyone we're seeing in this frame certainly would have the cameras on their vest or their person.
Yeah, of course, and we're talking about that California National Guard and Governor Gavin Newsom calling it an overreach and overreaction by President Trump to send them in. Of course, we're hearing from different Democratic governors calling about this and talking about how Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth potentially threatened to send in the Marines, threatening to send in the U.S. Marines into American neighborhoods. They said in a statement, undermines the mission of our service members, erodes public trust, and shows Trump and the administration does not trust law enforcement. In terms of how closely they work together, we already talked about Marines being sent in there a little bit, but do you think it potentially will combat the fact that law enforcement is already, looks like they're handling this pretty well? Would you agree that sending in the Marines doesn't feel like it is something that is necessary right now? It looks like law enforcement is handling themselves somewhat well, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that that Marine threat coming from the Secretary and the President, that was more rhetoric than anything else, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But here's the deal. If this gets out of hand, I can assure you the President will activate the Marines, and they'll come in there and quell us very quickly with a bunch of Marines. But I think it was more rhetoric and a shot over the bow to Newsom, if you will. But I agree with you. I mean, I think the cops, and there's some federal agents involved in this as well. I think they're doing an excellent job. Given what we're seeing, I mean, you don't see anyone in law enforcement dragging people out of the crowds or beating on people. They're trying to keep the peace at this point and not escalate it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And obviously that would be an unprecedented move to send in the Marines. It was decades ago that we've seen the National Guard being deployed without the advice of a state governor. Is there going to be potentially, if Marines are sent, a communication disruption? Because we've really never seen that.
It's new to us, right? 1960s. I was born in '61. I reached myself a little bit, but that's certainly something we're unfamiliar with. We've not seen that on the homeland, so I'm not really sure what or how that would look. When the Secretary put that announcement out, I was kind of like, really? I mean, it took me by surprise. So I truly don't think it reaches to that level for the Marines to be involved in the homeland. But it's probably nice to have them on standby should this get worse. I mean, we just don't want to see buildings burning and certainly loss of lives.
Yeah, that is a good point. You don't want to need them at a time of crisis and then not have them ready to go. That certainly makes sense in terms of this. If it does get out of hand, if it does escalate in this way. Jamie, anything else that you're watching? Anything else here on Live Now from Fox? I do just see a tweet right now posted here of this, and I just want to take it real quickly and get your opinion on this, because the LA Central Division, I'm reading it, and just like you are saying, the use of less lethal munitions has been authorized by the incident commander. Persons throwing items at officers will be detained and arrested. Any unlawful assembly has been declared by the incident commander. What is unlawful assembly at this point?
Essentially what we're seeing, anytime you have a protest or protesters that are gathering like we see without a permit and the proper authorization by the county or state or the city, it's an unlawful assembly. And, if you look at the right side of the screen, you'll see a police officer with a megaphone or a bullhorn. he's giving those commands. And I'm going to just recite what he's saying. This is an unlawful assembly. You must leave now. Disperse, leave now. It's an unlawful assembly. And what we're doing is giving those verbal commands to actually be able to deploy some of these less lethal emissions that Central was talking about. And I think that statement came out because I think they're concerned for nightfall. And I think they want to kind of regurgitate what we knew last night. But the cops aren't going to put up with it. You need to just leave. And you see gas going off on the right side of the screen there. So these police officers have now been given the green light to call an unlawful assembly. They need to disperse, and if not, you're probably going to see some arrests just short of nightfall or right after nightfall, would be my guess. And if I may, Andy, I think that's when we'll see more National Guard come in and fill into the ranks because of the night danger. I mean, these, you're kind of out there in the elements, if you will.
Yeah, and we haven't seen, like you mentioned, some of these local police, this SWAT gear right now. It doesn't seem like any of the Brown, any of the National Guard members in a different attire, different tactical gear showing up there. And they look like they're protecting a building of some kind. So you anticipate address and that arrest group to show up quickly?
I think they're going to try to call this in sectors or sections, if you will, to kind of demonstrate that, hey, we're here to enforce the law. We're here to stop and to quell this. And I think you probably will start seeing some more arrests. I think you're going to see some intentional arrests, especially the agitators. We see a cop and a protester pushing one another, right? I have to give my hats off to the police. I mean, they're very well measured and they're not overreacting, which is great because we want to get these people home, right? And get them to disperse. And if you start doing that pushing match, that's going to incite other people. And you'll see an arrest team coming up behind these men. They're walking up. That arrest team will go in and snatch that person out. So it doesn't look like that shoving match between the protester and the police. They just put a stop to it, if you will.
And you talk about this as they're pushing people away and there's close in proximity. You can see them pushing this group back and some of the violent nature as you can see them throwing different things. And again, one more time, viewer discretion is advised right now watching this unfold. These clash between anti-ICE demonstrators and local law enforcement on the ground in Los Angeles. Viewer discretion is advised for anyone tuning in right now. If you're just joining us, watching this in real time, live, raw, and unfiltered. We mentioned them trying to quell some of this violence before nightfall. We see different things being thrown, and we did hear about them talking about the unlawful assembly. How hard is it to pick out a face, a person in the crowd that may have tossed a canister over the front line? Is it difficult to do?
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And you'll see multiple rows of officers, right? And that first row of officers, they're taking the brunt of whatever's being thrown to them. The second row, I mean, those are your spotters. They can literally sit back and watch from afar and pick out those people that are throwing objects like we just saw a few seconds ago. So is it hard? Yes and no. It depends on your vantage point. And there's some slick protesters. I mean, they've been through these before, some of these people, and they want to can all the way to the top of the police. So things are starting to get a little bit louder as we see. It's been pretty peaceful up until now. And if you look to the right side, you'll see some police officers coming up from the rear. I'm going to suggest those are going to be the folks that come in and snatch those people out and make the arrest.
All right, and potentially arrest and detainments coming for individuals that threw objects at law enforcement. Jamie, you've been talking to me for quite some time. I'm going to let you go in just a second, but I'm going to give you the parting words. Anything else you want to add before I let you go here on Live Now?
Peaceful protest. And if you're thinking of going out there tonight and voicing your opinion, do it correctly. Don't get involved with these agitators and insurrectionists, as I call them. And there's nothing wrong with protesting and voicing your opinion. Just stop the violence. And if I may, Andy, you may have heard this. I haven't heard any of our leaders from either side of the party come out and say, we need to stop this. Maybe that would actually carry some weight if our local leaders would get ahead of it and say, hey, we need to stop and take a breath.
Yeah, that is a very good point. All right, Jamie Copenhaver, I appreciate your time here on Live Now from Fox. Your insight is invaluable as we're watching this moving very quickly in Southern California. Thanks again.
Stay safe.
All right, thank you so much. All right, of course, here on Live Now from Fox, we did hear from Governor Gavin Newsom a little bit ago talking about